All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to ask those in the back. If you want, please come to the front. As a former fifth grade school teacher, we want the energy of all of you, so come to the front if you can. For those of you in the back who are still talking, we're going to go ahead and silence both phones and everything else, and we are going to get started. I'm going to wait 30 seconds while a few people just come to the room and make their way.
I just want to make, is this the 45-minute or the 3-hour version of this podcast?
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Gerard Robinson. I am a professor of practice at the University of Virginia in the School of Leadership and Public Policy. Welcome to a session where we're going to talk about private school choice and why it matters, and particularly a conversation regarding what every policymaker should know. So let's put in context that in 2024, we have 1 million children who are in private school choice programs, and that didn't happen overnight or by accident. When you think about the fact that we have at least 22 states that have adopted or expanded state-funded programs or publicly funded programs throughout the United States, that's actually a really good thing, both public and private. Now, when we talk about school choice in both the public and private sector, particularly in the private sector, we can look at vouchers, we can talk about tax credits, and a lot of people are particularly interested in education savings accounts, which are widely popular throughout the country. We didn't arrive to this state overnight. When you think about 30 plus years ago in places like Milwaukee, where you had Dr. Howard Fuller or a state representative named Polly Williams who decided to pass the first voucher program in an urban area. That was a big move. You also had Fannie Williams, who was also a Democrat in Cleveland, Ohio, who supported vouchers. That law, in fact, made its way to the Supreme Court in the Zellman case. Really big push. When you think about where we are today, we have at least 11 states that are now experimenting with universal choice. The programs in Milwaukee and Cleveland were primarily focused on low-income families, focused particularly there, where now we have lawmakers saying, let's look at universal choice across the ground. And so I have two people with me today who are going to talk about not only where we've come from, but where we are today, but more importantly, where we're headed. And this is particularly important to lawmakers, staffers, advocates, researchers, and others, because this is a great moment to be here, and I have two people to talk with me about that. In the middle, I've got my good friend Darrell Bradford, CEO of 50 Can. Give it up for Darrell. I also have Patricia Levesque, CEO of ExcelinEd. Patricia and I were talking. I met her 2006 or 7 in Atlanta for the first time. And Darrell and I know each other probably equally as long, going back to the Bayo days. And so let's start talking about school choice. So, Darrell, let's start with you. Big time for how far we've come, what we're doing. Tell us where we are today, right now, with the whole idea of options for families.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. All
right, there it is. Special shout out to Patricia and ExcelinEd for letting me come here and make mistakes again, so thank you. So I think there are three things that are going on right now, and they're sort of important to understand because they contextualize what policymakers are doing and some of the decisions they're making and some of the challenges they're sort of trying to solve. And it's like a little triangle. So on the one side, you have the American publics at large, American families at large, relationship with traditional district schooling, right, with residentially assigned, like, neighborhood primacy as the way that you get your school. And we used to sort of talk about this as like a tale of two families almost. There was a way like low-income people were dealing with this, which wasn't so great, and that was what most of our policy was built around. And then upper-income people just sort of like bought their way out of the problem with the right mortgage, or with the right tuition. And COVID changed that in a very like egalitarian way where the screwing was equal and widespread. And so I'm sorry, I just got to keep it real. And so the effect of that is that, like 1 million people across the country have decided that they want to do something different than just go to their neighborhood school. Sometimes it's another public school, sometimes it's a charter school, sometimes it's a private school, sometimes it's homeschooling, sometimes it's a co-op. There are all these other ways that happens. So that asserts all kinds of pressures on traditional district schools that were being asserted before but are now more acute, right? So that's the one thing. Over here, on the other side, you have a change in the consumption of schooling, right? I'll call it that way, which existed before the pandemic but is more widespread now. And so, basically, I've sort of argued that there's 4 ways people get their school together, and they're on, a continuum. You can get the bundle, right, which is that basically you buy a seat and everything comes with the seat. And normally you get the bundle with your house, or you get it with tuition or something like that, right? You can get what I call Bundle Plus, which I always like to say is how the real ballers do it. So you get the best bundle you can get, and then you go all in on enrichment and tutoring and volunteerism and all these other things that are arguably accelerants to the achievement gap. And I think ESAs play a really important part in that. Then you can get what was really sort of supercharged during the pandemic, which is called a half bundle. So that's where you say, I want to do what I want to do, but I don't want to build a football field or a physics lab onto the back of my house. So I'd like to figure out how I go into some arrangement with a school or a school district, whatever, where they do these things and I do this other stuff. And then you can just go your own way, which is rise of homeschooling and all these other things. The last piece of this is that there is a revolution in school finance, and that's called an education savings account. And I think it's important to think about ESAs not as a mode of education, which is how people sort of portray them a lot. They are an enabler to the other 2 sides of the equation. Right, so all of this is going on at the same time, and they present lots of opportunities, challenges, and decisions for policymakers. And depending on which side of this, which leg of this triangle you want to be on, you're going to pick or implement policy differently. So just one quick example, if you care about market forces, right? Let's say you want to fledge an education sector that is unlike the ones that we have now, right? So not like the traditional public schools you recognize, not like charter schools you recognize, not like private schools you recognize, then that means you will favor an ESA approach where, accountability or measurement looks like X, right? Looks sort of unlike what charter schools look like, for instance. That's a question that policymakers are trying to figure out right now. If you are a state with a longer history of traditional accountability, e.g. Georgia, Tennessee, Louisiana, your approach to having an assessment in your sort of new sector is going to be different than if you're in Arizona, where the DNA of that state has been kind of risk, try, on repeat, basically, for the last 30 years. So I would just say this is the most exciting time to be thinking about all of this. I use the word fledge on purpose, we're really on the shoulder of what could be something really dynamic, new, and unlike what we have had before, and I'm excited to be here.
In an interesting way, not only are we talking about unlocking opportunity, we're going to unlock opportunity by unzipping zip codes.
Yeah. Yes.
And doing this. So I like the options we have, but with any option you have trade-offs. And so policymakers are trying to figure out, the majority of the students in my state go to a school in their assigned zip code. And even if we have open enrollment, not everyone's going to get it. How do we talk about the trade-offs coming into the type of market or really the options you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. We are, so 50CAN, we have campaigns in 10 states. We are multi-issue. All of our states are working on some aspect of this. Some of them have it all. Some of them pieces of it. But the other things that we didn't stop doing were our whole agenda to improve the school that is closest to you if you decide you want to go to it. Mm-hmm. So we passed 3 laws on the back of the outrageously good presentation from Emily Hanford two years ago here in Utah on science of reading. I think that was Georgia, New Mexico, and Tennessee, I think is what it was. We adopted the list, like who has the good list of high quality instruction materials aligned to structured literacy. So we do that kind of stuff. We're very concerned about measurement, right, which is an important sort of tension point around this, because we don't always want to get the same things, but we also don't. So let me just give you this anecdote. So I'm like the bad guy at 50 Can, because I'm Mr. Real, And so I have been raising with our states and our sort of more accountability-driven people that the attack is not from the new, it's from the traditional left at this point. Because California, New Mexico, New Jersey, New York all decided to make it harder and harder to get assessment data by lowering cut scores, eliminating the regents, which New York did last week, releasing assessment data later and later, including after elections. And then I think you probably all saw that Massachusetts, the puritanical, I'm going with the metaphor hard here, shining light on the hill of high standards, decided to throw the MCAS exit exam, out with the baby in the bathwater last week, which is actually a pretty profound change, given the history of that state. And so that's something that we're incredibly kind of wary of, as a network right now. So we are still fighting on all of these issues because, again, if you don't want a half bundle or to go your own way or whatever, we want your choice to work for you. We also think information empowers a great market of optionality. Like Patricia and I have been talking about how you regulate a market and a monopoly differently, but that information is kind of crucial. That's a real piece of this. But we also want to see something different, and all the polling says that parents, rich, poor, black, white, purple, or otherwise, want to see something different too, and we want to help make that happen.
As I hear Darrell talk, and he's talking about bundling, on one hand, I'm thinking about Jake from State Farm, and then he says you can go your own way. I'm thinking about Fleetwood Mac. Just shows you the diversity of ways we're moving with this. So, Patricia, you've had an opportunity as a leader, and particularly as a leader who's served amongst really the longest in the country in a role like this. Micro-schooling is also something that parents like. We have charters, vouchers, all of these. At some point, we're almost possibly and inadvertently overwhelming parents with information. We've got to have one place to go to take a look at this. I think you've provided us with a good opportunity. So tell us more about schoolchoicematters.com.
Sure. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Darrell, and thank you all for coming. I wanted to go back to your question on trade-offs and just say something to the policymakers in the audience, in that every policy you work on is a trade-off, right? How many of you have bills in the legislature that are scope and service issues with healthcare, right? Do ARNPs get to do this without a doctor's supervision, or do optometrists get to do this versus an ophthalmologist? You're always chiropractors versus MDs. I see these healthcare bills across the country where you're having to make the decision: do you allow more access by having more people become providers, or do you have to maintain this certain very strict standard of care that limits who gets to go where and what and who has opportunities? And I think it's really important in education to think about that as well, right? You have a system that is a well-supported system, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, what I think is this continuum of accountability and autonomy. But educational choice is about deciding and making trade-offs, and what we are seeing across the country is the trade-off now bending a bit more toward, let's take a risk on parents, right? Let's give them an opportunity to find what's best for their child. And I think that's really important. Now, with ExcelinEd, we believe, right, that there's many forms of school choice, of educational choice. And so you as policymakers, how do you navigate the nuances of when you adopt a public school choice or an open enrollment policy or a private school choice policy? How do you know how to build the fine points of that policy for trade-offs like broad access, broad autonomy, or certain levels of standards of health, safety, general welfare, academic accountability, those kind of things. How do you build a system with all of those things? And so what we have spent some time doing, and we've launched it, is a website called School Choice Matters. You can use the QR code there to download it. And it is a place where you can go and find on multiple issues. If we go to the next slide, maybe you can see it a little bit bigger. What we've done is looked at open enrollment policy, so public school choice, charter school policy, private school choice, homeschooling policy, and then if you see around the edge of the circle there are things that we call enhancers. So policies like transportation. If you really want to have public school choice, you really want to have charter choice, you really want to have private school choice, how are the kids going to get there, right? If they can't get to the choice that you're offering, they really don't have choice. So what are enhancement policies that are there? And this site is designed to help you depending on what policy set you're interested in. Some of you might be here because it's a private school choice panel, but when you go back home, your priority may be, how do I expand open enrollment and public school choice in my state? So what you'll be able to do is to go onto this website and then search. So if you go to the next slide, this happens to be open enrollment policy on the key issue of transfers within districts.
Right. This is not an electoral map.
Yeah, this is not. This is, what is your state policy on the ability of families to have easy transfers within their school district? And you can see there's a red, yellow, green kind of listing, green being the most almost like a parental right that they have, that ability to transfer within districts. A limited yellow, or your state doesn't have a policy on this yet. Do we have a next slide? I don't remember. And then what you'll be able to do, so you'll be able to look at that on every single policy set, public school choice, private school choice, charter, homeschool, and the enhancement policies. And you'll be able to go to your state. So you'll be able to pull up your state and see, where is my state on all of these different really important policy provisions. And I don't think we have a slide on it. You're going to be able to compare. I did this yesterday with my board, and I put Indiana versus Tennessee versus Florida versus Ohio, so that my board members could even look and see what are the differences and which states you'll be able to see have a really like a gold standard on these policies. I want you to know about that because it's something that we've done in literacy called Early Literacy Matters. So you can see, where does your state need to move on early literacy policy? This is a place where you can go to as a policymaker to look, how can we do better? How can we, again, talking about those trade-offs, what are some things in policy that we can amend to make a bit stronger? I do want to shout out one thing, and I don't know if this is what you were going to ask me, so I'll jump ahead. There are a lot of other really good partner resources. So what this site is not, this is not Ed Choice's ABCs of School Choice. That is just the encyclopedia. If you want to know anything, any detail about any private school choice program in the country, how it's structured, who's eligible, what the scholarship amounts are, we link into the Ed Choice's ABCs of School Choice. This is more for the details and the fine points. So I'll give you an example in charter school policy. You can have two states that have charter school policy, right? But one state has a policy that recognizes that high-performing charters need an incentive to grow and scale. And so they have actual incentives, or they remove barriers so high-performing charters can expand, and you can see it. You can see a growth in the ideas and the Great Hearts and the KIPS and the Success Academies that in those states. And another state might have a charter policy, but all charters are created equal, all are treated equally, all have high barriers to entry, right? You're not going to see the growth and the expansion in charter policy in that particular state. So use this resource when you want to find details of what can I do to move the needle to make sure we have broader access, broader scale for actual parental opportunities in your state.
That's actually a great place to build off. So when I took a look at one of your slides, you had a pyramid, and within that pyramid were others. What I like about this is you're showing that we don't have competition. What we have is a smorgasbord of opportunities. I mean, when you go to a smorgasbord, you're not saying, oh, the salad is competing with, the meat or something like that. No, we're saying that these are all opportunities and options for families. So
I do suggest you wait for the meat, though.
And for the veggies and the vegans in the room, they'll go for the salad.
That's right. That's right.
But you have the option on the same buffet. So as a leader, what was your aha to put together a site that had charters and open enrollment and homeschooling and private schools? Because sometimes policymakers think those things are separate, or there should be a one-stop shop to do this.
Yeah. I think for us, in the work that we do with states, we kind of mentally set 3 goals for every state that we work in. We want to see your reading and math outcomes just skyrocket, right? We want to see more students learning how to read and do math. We want to see expanded parental options, and we want to see this really strong education to workforce system. Those are the 3 goals that we set, and then we want to come up with policy solutions for you in all of those 3 areas. And when you talk about empowering families with options, I think what has struck me is over time, and especially as Darrell has said with the pandemic, people want more. And for some states, it has been too often it's a this or a that. Like, we're going to work on this policy versus that. And I worked for a governor, and he wouldn't, he probably would say it. And by the way, he did micromanage, just to,
That's a shock.
But I could tell you stories. Now, lost my train of thought on that too. But there are either or.
Yes.
With Governor Bush, right? We never had one education priority. We had 18 education priorities a year. And what I think we wanted to do for states is to get policymakers who maybe their passion area was open enrollment, but be able to see everything else that could be done in one place. Because I do think one of the great things about our federalist system is states are competitive with each other, right? And so if you see another state that, why do they have 5 more greens than we do, right, on open enrollment, that will motivate you to want to take more action. That's why we...
Can I throw up one thing? And I'm going to prove I'm a bad politician because I don't know everybody in the room, but big up to the Senate President from the great state of Iowa, Amy Sinclair, who's in the room. Thank you very much for shepherding in one of the country's newest ESA programs. So I think this sort of take on education and like all the sectors is incredibly important because it speaks to like the ways that 2 different groups of people think about education policy. So for me, I too don't think it's either or, right? I think all of these sectors are actually complementary, and that different kinds of school governance help you get different kinds of educational good into the world, right? So the best schools in New York City basically are selective or charter schools, basically, right? So if you the best public high schools in New York are selective. And I'm like, okay, good. Like, we know that kind of school governance can do a great job when selectivity is the mode of delivery, right? And more power to it, right? Do more of it, Charter schools bring another kind of good into the world. And, in our sort of more traditional context, we have a very, highly studied sector of gap closing, achievement gap busting. Charter schools, they're like the prince of charter schools, formerly known as no excuses. There's still no excuses for me. So we do that. We have a lot of we have transportation. We have a lot of private schools, right? And I spend a lot of time talking to people about the role that charter schools can play in helping ESA world, because there's like a lot of things that charter schools know how to do, like enrollment and measurement that maybe like a new education entrepreneur who's a former public school teacher who's decided who has an idea, like wants to do something and is looking at so all of these things I think are incredibly complementary. Here's the other thing though. Parents don't care.
Yeah.
So like if you're in New York, you could throw a rock and find a parent with a kid with a plaid skirt on who thinks they're going to a private school when they're really going to a charter school, right?
Yeah.
The threshold is, does this school work for my kid, right? And so why would you want to eliminate your ability to make more good using all of the governance tools that are available. So I just think this is a really non-exclusive way to think about school choice, and I think it's the way parents have sort of always thought about it.
Patricia, you said parents want more, and they really want more and more and more. They want a lot. Part of that is when I talked about 1 million students in private schools and 22 states, either adopting or expanding, we're talking about within 5 years.
Yeah.
So this is a really big push in the 5-year period. Well, with any push, you know who else wants more and more and more? High-income families. Now, this is important because when we think about Milwaukee and Cleveland and the early voucher movement, it was really targeted toward lower-income families, and that was determined by those who qualify for a free or reduced-price lunch and other measures. Well, as time moved on, someone says we have to open up the door to other families. So I'll start with you, Darrell, and I'll go to you, Patricia. What's the controversy? What are people saying, and what are your thoughts?
I thought you were going to go down that more kind of.
Oh, that's funny. How do you like it? How do you like it? No, I was going to do more, rebel yell, but.
No, that's I like that one too. I'm a big Billy Idol fan. Okay, so all right, so I should put my priors on the table. So I did not start working on. Not like anyone will care, but I didn't start working on education choice, about which I'm very passionate, because I wanted to help rich people get schools that they could probably already afford, right? Sure. I started doing it because I grew up as a poor kid in Southwest Baltimore. I got into a school I never would have gone to, if I hadn't been lucky, and it changed my life. And so that's why I get to be here with you today. That's like my underlying thing that motivates all my stuff. But I can remember when I was working in Jersey in the first Christie administration, we were trying to open a charter school. Well, somebody was trying to open this woman named Bonnie Liao. So and I wrote a piece in ExcelinEd about this. You should read my piece and not Mike Petrelli's piece about it. So his piece is good, mine is better, right? So Bonnie Liao was a literal rocket scientist. And she wanted to open a Mandarin immersion charter school in West Windsor, which is a wealthy burb right next to Princeton. And all hell broke loose, right? And so for me, I had always thought that charter schools were like, look, you make charter schools because you want to close achievement gaps to low-income kids of color, which we do in Newark and Camden very well. But chartering is also a way to bring difference into the world, right? And even if you live in a great district, that doesn't mean the schools there are great for every kid. So let's talk about this. And so I was on an island, basically. I was the only person who thought we should be going to the deck for the Princeton International Charter School, Academy Charter School, which is called PIACS, right? So the administration didn't want the heat, right? Christie's very supportive of charter schools, so this is that kind of thing. So they were like, we're not doing this thing. And they basically adopted a policy of only authorizing in urban areas. But all of the suburban people who came off of the bench on this were not mollified, right? They were like, no, we want more, right? And so they were able to get this, were turned into the Save Our Schools chapter in New Jersey and this kind of stuff. A bill introduced in the Assembly that would have required a local vote to authorize a new charter school. New Jersey only has one authorizer. So if the governor doesn't like charter schools, we have a moratorium, basically. But if you are a local district, you can't say no, right? And this bill would have stopped charter growth in New Jersey, hands down, period, right then and there. And I was like, yo, these rich people, wow. Like, they just came off of the bench. They blew up my whole thing. We've been making the case for low-income families to have charter schools and all these other opportunities. And they were like, nah. And the legislators were like, nah. So we had allies in the Senate that were able to head this off. But for me, the chastening was incredibly instructive. And it was that if these people aren't in my coalition, they're going to oppose me. And we saw this, I think, with other education policies, with teacher eval, with Common Core, with these other things, right? Like suburban families were like, there's nothing in this for me. I'm against it. And so I have come to embrace or take the position that ESA programs, charter schools too, need to take the position of universality as a political revelation. Because without these folks in our coalition, we'll be like New York is right now, where we have some of the best charter schools in the world, and we can't open another one to save our lives because we're at the cap in the city, and the governor and the legislature aren't going to raise that cap anytime soon. So I just throw that out there, sort of like a different way of thinking about it. And I do just want to put this other thing on the side of this. So You know who totally gets this? The traditional public schools. And it's like genius the way they hooked it up, right? It was happening undercover, and like now I write about this a lot now too. But basically, they say, listen, especially the rich people, right, with all the money, all the influence, all the whatever. They say, look, I got this thing for you. Here's how it works, right? We'll give you a publicly subsidized school, but not everybody will be able to go to it. And more importantly, if somebody tries to go to it that we say can't go to it,
right,
we'll police the hell out of them for real, right? Like with real police. Right. This is a thing, right? You, on the other side of this, you get to say, hey, I send my kids to public school, which depending on what cocktail parties you go to, that's like a party starter, you know? And you get the most incredible subsidy for the wealth that we can ever give you, for the wealth that we can ever give you, which is that the value of your house appreciates as the function of the school exclusivity, right? So if that's, like, people respond to incentives. That's not going to get unwound by just making the case that we need to do better for poor kids. So again, I've been beaten up by life to be in this position, but I'm a firm sort of believer in universal approaches, including ESA stuff now, including the rich. We can talk about how to do it, you know, whatever. Because I want them in my coalition so that the tools endure, and we're not doing Illinois, or we're doing charter cap in New York and a bunch of other places.
Universality. Okay, interesting. Let's build on that. So, Patricia, earlier I talked about the whole idea of universal choice. In theory, the belief is if we give enough money, enough options to public and private school families, that there will be enough options to open. Again, it comes with the trade-offs. What's your thinking about universal choice as we've seen it, and given your role in seeing how policy works, how should lawmakers start thinking about this?
Yeah. Well, I want to start with my fundamental belief on choice is that every child is unique. Education is extremely important, and every single family needs to have the opportunity to find what works best for their child, period. That's what I believe. And how a parent and what a parent chooses, I don't want to substitute my judgment for why and what they're going to pick. So the policy perspective is how do you expand those opportunities for all families? I think another way to think about it is, does school choice, whether it's private, charter, et cetera, does expanding it kind of, does the rising tide lift all boats? And I would say on private school choice, the evidence is clear. There has been so much research on private school choice, not only improving the outcomes of the kids who took the choice, improving the outcomes of the public schools that were located near the private schools where there was a lot of choice. I will pull out the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program because I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. It is the longest running, 24 years, largest serving. It served well more than 1 million students. And up until 2 years ago, it was only for low-income students, right? Only low-income students could participate. And that program has been singularly researched more than any individual private school choice program in the country. And what are the results? The results are that not only when you look at annual growth of those students, 13 consecutive years, because that's how many years we had the data, did those students do as well or better in reading or math than their low-income public school peers. But we were able to track the students. The longer that a student was in a tax credit scholarship program, the higher the graduation rates, the higher the college going rates, the higher even job wages after graduation. So we were able to see long-term progress with the largest program in the country that was targeted for low-income students. The research and the evidence is there. So for us, it's how do you design a program that works for all kids? And one thing that I would say, going back to that question of universal or targeted to low-income students, we believe eligibility should be for all students, right? That all students should be eligible so families can exercise options. A lot of benefits come from that. Darrell talked about the power of the coalition for protecting that program. But I think there's also the power of the schools that will open, the different innovative schools that will open once there is a universal market to serve. And so that means there will be more opportunities for low-income kids. But there is one policy point that I don't believe any state that has done private school choice has done well, and that is having weighted funding for low-income students. Some states do weighted funding for special needs students, so if a special needs student gets a scholarship, right, they're going to need different services, more money follows them. But we don't have states yet that are saying, in this marketplace, and you have a private school that's getting ready to serve different students, when you have a low-income student and you know that they're going to need additional services, and the parents are going to have to close the gap between whatever the scholarship amount is and the private school tuition, those kids need to come with more resources. That is an area where I would say, when you're doing private school choice, yes, have access. Yes, make sure that the autonomy and the accountability balance is right. But the one thing that we have not solved yet across this country is, do kids who are at risk bring more resources with them so that the marketplace is actually there to be able to serve them?
If I can build, so that is exquisitely said. So, and I agree with all of it. So I just want to build on it a little bit to go back to the three sides of the thing, and in particular, like the public school kind of side of the thing. So I know that. So I'm not an elected official, but I did sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night, and I understand that that these things are difficult and the incentives are tough. But if you were ever going to think about completely overhauling how you finance education in your state, now it's time to do it. And I say this because there are a few things, one of which Patricia has highlighted expertly. We've never done basically weighted student formula in choice, which is an important thing. We've actually done the reverse. We've said the less the establishment likes your choice, the less we will weight you. Right? So if you go to a charter school, you get less money if you go to your district school. If you go to a private school, you get less money than if you go to a charter school. If you go to this school and your formula is not progressive versus the one on the other side of the street, you're worth $10,000 less. If you go to this school with all the young teachers versus this school with all the senior teachers in the same district, there's a $7,000 differentiation in spending. Right? All of this works its way through how the machine works, right? So on the one hand, if you don't want to have kids be second-class citizens of your formula based on the school that they choose, then now it's time to kind of talk about that. On the other hand, and I did here I'm going to come out for the districts, right? So it is my hypothesis that most districts sort of have built their long-term financing around what is now proven a fiction, which is unlimited student growth. And that's not real, right? Like enrollment, birth rates are down in the West, meaning like the West, not like the Western United States, the West. There's just and there's more optionality, whatever. And I think it is so in Texas, I heard this the other day from Marguerite Rosa. You can only negotiate a teacher contract a year at a time. In New Jersey, we do them 3 years at a time. They would do them 30 years at a time if they could, and lock in the increases, right? Like, I can't tell you what I'm doing in 30 minutes, let alone in 3 years from now, right? So the idea that there is more choice, that there are fewer kids, that school districts actually need better financial tools to deal with these kinds of things. To me, that's a harmonious discussion with how you support families no matter what choices they make, and in particular, how you make sure kids who have higher need bring enough resources to stimulate a market that can serve them too.
I just want to add to Darrell by saying I would charge you, I would love to get up on stage next year and talk about, let me tell you about the first state that has done this, right? who will be the first state that will say a student is a student is a student? Whether you go to a public school, a charter school, or a private school, or a different blended option, but all low-income kids in our state get more money. And it follows them. Their public school, charter school, private school choice. Every special needs student gets more. And then basic students. And think about this, operating and capital. If a student is a student is a student, right? Then why shouldn't the operating and the capital money be the same for every student, and then let the parents pick? Let the parents figure out what is the best system for their child. No state in the country has thought through that yet, and I would challenge one of you to go out there and do it. We'd love to help you.
One general question for both of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. When you talked about low-income, high-income families moving forward, how do we respond to people who say, guess what, high net worth people also come with high networks? And the high-income moms.
You've been sitting on that forever, right?
The high network moms and dads are going to maneuver the system to the advantage of their kid. Yeah. Talk to me about that. And then
that's what they're doing now. Let's just start. That's what they're doing now.
Okay.
I'll tell you a story. And I've been working now. I started when I was 10 because I've been working in policy for 28 years. And you get to see the impact of the policy that you work on. I will tell you, in private school choice, there is nothing more fulfilling than being able to talk to a family that has been blessed by private school choice. And I'll tell you, so Governor Bush told me this story. He called me maybe 3 years ago. And he had just gone to the UPS store to take to pick up his mail, pick up a package or something like that. And the person that was running the UPS store said, can I talk to you? Sure. You're Governor Bush, right? Yeah, yes. Well, you may not remember this, but you did a program that allowed poor kids to go to private schools. And I was one of those poor kids. And with a scholarship, I was able to go, and he named this Catholic high school in Miami-Dade that he went to. And he said, that high school changed my life. Not only did I get on a better track academically, but the people and the relationships that I made and people who mentored me and took me under their wing, they're part of the reason why I own this UPS franchise, right?
Good story.
I think we don't think about the political and social capital. Yeah, that this is a person who his life trajectory was changed because policy, I'll say it again, policy changes lives, guys. Policy changes lives. And I want us to be urgent in thinking about how to do that. That social capital, that network, that is one of the reasons why some people pick different schools. They want to be with a set of people that has my shared values. They want to go to a school of faith that believes religiously the way I believe because there's a community, there's a network there. A lot of these things you can't legislate in a certain way, right? Parents are going to pick what works best for their child, and I think what comes with it, Gerard, are those networks that make a lifetime of difference for the kids.
And thanks for bringing in social capital, because for 30 years that has not been a part of our nomenclature. Darrell, a couple of minutes, and then we'll open up to the audience.
All right, so
go start lining up.
If after you get done trolling School Choice Matters, if you want to go to 50can.org, we in the summer ran a survey of 20,000 American families. So basically like 400 a state, everybody state in there. Everybody state in here is in there. And we asked them a whole bunch of questions like, do you feel like you have a choice? Do you like the school you attend? If you had the opportunity, would you pick another one? Do you feel like you have the information you need to make a good choice? Like, do you like tutoring? If you had an extra $1,000, what would you do with it? Like this kind of stuff. And we have this like cool beach ball and a whole bunch of other things to it that you can look at. So I just and you can download your state, you can download the whole thing. So it's at 50can.org, can.org. But I only roll that out there to say that we do a whole section that is about how families get their information. And rich families and poor families get their information differently. There's an asymmetry there, but you'll be surprised what the asymmetry is. So on the one hand, and I see my man John Dean is here, the rich families are more likely to comparison shop, right? Which could be a function of using great schools, or it could be a function of having more time in a car to go do school visits and these kinds of stuff. But low-income families, far from winging it, actually trust grades and their teacher. Those are the people they talk to, right? So there are all kinds of incentives built into that may help you make a good choice or may inhibit you making a good choice. But they trust the expert. Rich families trust themselves and their friends, right? So they go. So they look at the kids' work and they say, if I think it's hard, it must be hard.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, I asked my boy. My boy said it was good, so it must be good, right? So how you think rich people and poor people pick in the day-to-day is actually inverted, right? Like the rich people are going with trusted sources, and the poor people, the rich people are going with networks, and lower income people are going with trusted sources, which is like an incredible kind of. There's all kinds of other stuff in there too. Like we have this great thing on. Here's the other thing we found. Low income families. I know we got to stop. I mean, this is really good though. So,
oh, no, great.
All right, they know all the stuff that their kids need. Tutoring, sports, like all the demand is incredibly high for all of it, right? The two main barriers are money and transportation. Actually, those things raise themselves all the time, which is also incredibly heartening because one of the narratives you get is like, we can't do any school choice stuff, we can't expand it because poor people don't know what they want. That is absolutely not true. They know exactly what they want, and they know exactly what is in the way of them getting it. So, yeah. Thank you.
So I'm opening it up for questions. We have 2 mics. If you decide to come to the mic, I only ask 2 things. Just give us your name and ask a question, not give a speech. All right. So thank you for the first brave soul.
Hi, good morning. My name is Morgan Camus, and I work with Outschool.org. And we provide family navigation to ESA families so that when they look at the report cards of choice, they can actually make a choice, make it well, make it confidently, and spend all of their funds. This question, because both of you talked so beautifully about a family's ability to choose, my question was, as you were thinking about that, would you call them the triangle bubbles within the circle, did family navigation come into consideration as you were evaluating different state policies to set families up for success in what they pick?
Great question.
Not yet. And so what I'll say is this was a beast of a project, and I'm looking right at Ben DeGros, who took on the challenge of this. This is just version 1, right? Even the thing that I just told you on states need to provide extra weighted funding for low-income kids and special needs kids, we don't measure that yet, right? We are just looking at the fundamentals and the basics of policy design, just like we did with early literacy matters. There's going to be a next version where we've been talking about not only looking at is there weighted funding provided, but parent navigation, and there are going to be other challenges, right? We have all these opportunities with private school choice, but I'll tell you, in Florida, that's had private school choice now for 24 years, one of the things that we're finding is there were 500,000 kids or 400,000 kids on scholarship last year, right? But there were 100,000 more who applied for a scholarship, got it, and then didn't exercise it because they didn't have anywhere to go, right? Capacity is going to be an issue that as we see states mature in the opportunities that they provide, how do you incentivize or help with capacity? Zoning permitting issues. You want to know, how the obstacles right now for private school choice legislatively are the alphabet groups that want to get up and say we don't like choice and it's going to harm our schools. But I'll tell you, the next zone of attack is in zoning and permitting. Local county commissions that just say, we're not going to allow you to open a private school here, or we're going to charge you so much for the traffic study or whatever. That's their new way of going after and shutting down charter schools and private schools, is local county commissions on zoning and permitting. So we don't have parent navigation in there. We think parent navigation and supply and weighted funding for high-risk kids are three really critical things that we want to see states that have universal choice start looking at, because they're in the front end. We just haven't done it.
Yeah, and
But,
quick shout out for any of the electeds in the room. So OutSchool sort of helped implement the Virginia tutoring program, which is sort of like a tutoring catch-up ESA that Governor Youngkin passed, and had to deal with and answer a lot of these questions about how to get low-income families. So there's a nice case study there.
Thanks, Debo.
So,
Hey, Gerard.
Go ahead. Go.
We have one more. I have one issue that I do want to talk about, too.
Hello. Thank you for this. We've learned so much already. My name is Kelly Garcia. I sit on the State Board of Education in Florida, and I'm the founder of a nonprofit, GuideEd, based in Hillsborough County that focuses on that navigation issue. So in response to some of the comments about parents accessing this and thinking about this tool you have that seems to really focus on grass tops and legislators and those who are working to ensure that policies are great in their state, how do you determine whether that 100,000 families who are not using that money, how do we know that this is a capacity issue versus a lack of information, or even just a lack of empowerment, a lack of resources? I want to drill down into that number and your hypotheses, and maybe y'all have a different sense of why those 100,000 families are not using their scholarship.
Yeah.
great question.
Well, for the data in Florida, so the majority of Florida's program is administered by a not-for-profit Step Up for Students. And so Step Up actually has surveyed the parents on why didn't you exercise that choice, and gave them a list of reasons for why. And the biggest answer, so more than 50% of the kids, the response was, there wasn't a school, or there wasn't a school near me that I could get to, transportation, or there wasn't a school that could serve my child. So that was kind of an indication that their child has some special needs and there aren't services yet out there. So that's how we know in Florida that there's a gap in the capacity that's out there. I do think that as states put in place these ESA programs, getting and surveying parents every year, not only for customer satisfaction, are you satisfied? Like, how are you, how is it going with this program? But also asking some really key questions about challenges or obstacles that they're facing. Is that going to create that feedback loop, right? So that you can either fix policy or fix administration of the programs. And I do think we need to see more of that built into policy. And are there any other questions? Because I have something I
You want to weigh in, and I'll turn it back to Patricia.
Yeah, I think you're just getting at something that is important, and which is duration, right? So oftentimes we're talking to people about the first charter school law in America is 30 years old, basically, at this point.
Yeah.
And there are a little over 3 million students, 200,000 teachers, and 7,000 schools. We haven't been doing this thing for 5 minutes, comparably. And people are like, oh, you mean this new, amazing, fully fledged education sector didn't burst from the sea foam like Aphrodite? I mean, it's like, you got to give it a minute, And so one of the things I think, because you raised this point about information, which I think is vital, that's the second thing I want to say, is just that we're doing something really hard and really amazing right now. And it doesn't present itself all overnight. And challenges like, why didn't 100,000 people do anything? Was this a thing where they were like, no, I'm good? Or was this a thing that's like, hey, I'd like to do something else, but I couldn't? I think we have to be very deliberate about finding out why families did what they did and doing better as a result of that. That said, I just want to add this other thing to this. So it's so sticky. I've been saying it, but I always have to. I got to call out the person who came up with it. So this guy Leo Lenbeck, who is a school choice supporter in Texas. So one night I'm trolling that cesspool of human interaction, formerly known as Twitter. And I see somebody say, well, how are you going to regulate this ESA thing? And he goes, well, it's simple. You regulate a market and a monopoly differently. And that stuck with me so much, because what is happening right now is that we have basically a monopoly take that is state-enabled, state-managed, and state-regulated. And that's, for the most part, like our traditional address model of schooling. And then we used to have kind of like charter schools as the fulcrum between like open enrollment and private school choice. And they have a different regulatory scheme, right? It adds more parent input because you have parent choice, and it moves sort of like the state still has accountability, but the boards aren't elected anymore, right? You have like appointed nonprofit boards, right? And then you go one slide over, you see how many places are taking on private school choice now, whatever. You have independent schools, right? So they have a different thing. Normally we look at them and we say, is the money right? You get like, there's financial accountability, there's a financial audit, this kind of stuff. But again, we sort of amp the parents up a little bit more, right? We're like going more toward the market thing. And then right now what we have is almost all market, right? Where like there's a sector where families are like, where states are like, here's the money, you figure it out. And how you hold that accountable is a thing that is coming into existence, right? And so, Louisiana on their ESA, they're like, well, we have a range of tests, which, not for nothing, is something that Arizona did maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. They went to menu of assessments, which is actually a canard against opt-out at the time. So, because the choice was you're either going to have menu or nothing, that kind of thing. So, like the multiple assessment thing is one way people talk about this. Navigation as a function, right? Parent surveys, all this other stuff are like ways that people are saying, hey, we should think about this new sector differently than we think about our old sector. And kind of like one more like Scaramouche on this. I think that if like a lot of the people are like, we don't want to do the school choice stuff because it's unaccountable, like big district people. And then we're like, all right, do you want to take the state assessment next year? And they're like, hell no. So the idea that everybody wants the framework we have is one that we need to talk about, But I think the idea that we should regulate things differently, that we want different results from, is that's something that we should embrace.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman. Are you standing in the back for a question, or just standing in the back? Okay. Come on.
I want to just add
Go ahead.
a bit on Darrell, and I think about it as a continuum, right? And on one end of the continuum, you have home education, a parent teaching their own child, paying for it themselves. State have a really light touch. That parent is making individual decisions for their own child. And you have the other end of the continuum or the spectrum, where you have the public school system, right? And I'm going to describe the public school system, and some people have told me that it sounds derogatory. It's not meant to be. It's the system that has the benefit of sovereign immunity protection, right? It's the system that has the benefit or the power to tax, the power of eminent domain. It's the compulsory system that if you don't send your child to it, you can go to jail or be prosecuted, right? You have the default system, and the state dictates everything in the default system, from the standards, the certification of the teachers, and we say you have to send your child here, right? In that system, the state needs to have a stronger, more muscular say to ensure that learning is taking place because you're saying you have to go here. There's a continuum in between, and that's where private school choice, where there is no parent that is forced to send their child to a private school. 100% of them are choosing. So when you have a 100% parent-directed, parent-chosen system, but has public funding, what's the right balance for accountability and autonomy? And that's where we look to the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship model, right? For public funds, you need to have health, safety, general welfare, financial accountability. But from an academic standpoint, we get to say a menu of options, norm reference tests, the parents get the data, the state looks at the program in the aggregate, but the state doesn't intervene in the decisions of the parents, meaning the state doesn't take away or shut down those parental options. And I'd love for you to think about that. I'd love for you to think about charter schools being in between the public system and the private school choice, publicly funded choice system, because charter schools are 100% parent choice. But they also have the benefits, right, of federal, state, and local funding. But how many times have we over the years, and I blame myself on this, do we continue adding stuff onto the charter schools because it's a public school? Well, Florida just did this wonderful stuff on teacher pay, right? But they're also making charter schools pay a minimum teacher pay. And I kind of wanted to go, why? If the charter school system wants to do something different in their pay structure or their benefits, why are we making them be exactly like the traditional public school system? So that's the way we think about this balance between accountability and autonomy. The greater that the parent's making the decision and funding it, the very light touch of the state. The more the state is funding it and requiring it and managing, the more the state needs to make sure there's a level of learning going on. But when you have this sweet middle spot, parents are choosing, parents are accountable, but there's public funding. That's where it's the health, safety, general welfare, finance that we need to make sure the money's being spent well, but leave the academics and the choices and the curriculum and all of those things, leave those with the parent.
And I'm going to have to be the bad parent. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask the question. We're actually at 9:30, and we do have to make a quick pivot for the next event. Go ahead and ask your question, and they'll respond.
Great. Thank you. Phil Vaccaro from the EY Parthenon team. We've had the pleasure of working with both of your organizations in different choice environments. We talk a lot about the virtues of parent choice, but I believe there were ballot initiatives in 3 states that were just voted down in terms of private school choice. I'm curious to get any immediate reactions to that and what the concerns were in those states.
Yeah, so I was just saying this to somebody the other day, and water is wet, right? So in 2011, I think it's what it was, Chris Christie wanted to do a ballot initiative in New Jersey that would have meant every kid got the same amount of funding, of state aid. And the Democrats lost it. They were like, no, we can't do this. And the reason why they lost it is because it would have passed. And we have a school finance arrangement in New Jersey. It's court-ordered that, of which I'm broadly supportive. That means that kids in places like Newark and Camden and Trenton, whatever, get significantly more than a kid in like Alpine or Livingston, which are like very hoity-toity bedroom communities of New York City. I only highlight that to say that there are some things that choice supporters will get done better through the legislative process, and some things that are just dead on arrival if we try to put them on the ballot. And it's the same thing for the other side. So in that instance, if we put that on the ballot, it would have completely upended school funding. So they're more than happy to have that with the legislature, and actually to have it with the courts, not even the legislature. The legislature doesn't even get to act on it. So I was sort of unsurprised. Like the questions weren't great, and when you add up what legislatures are doing, and they are the entities that actually control this policy, I was not worried very much about those results.
Well,
I would just say, I think constitutional amendments that try to provide something that doesn't exist, it's still too abstract for people, even though it might sound good. It's like they don't know it. But constitutional amendments or referendum that we're going to take away, those
like
things, those can be defeated. And so that's what I think is part of the dynamic here.
That's actually a good point to end with. So, Darrell, thank you for reminding us about coalitions. For many years, there was one group called what I call the Coalition of Convenience. It was easy to throw things as to why it wouldn't work, but you joined the Coalition of Conscience and to say why it can. And for you, Cyndi Lauper's right, money changes everything. For Patricia, thank you for talking about lived research. Patrick Wolf, for you lawmakers, Patrick Wolf, a name you need to remember, University of Arkansas. He's got a group of acolytes across the country who have proven through data this stuff works, so you're not starting from scratch. Thank you for your leadership, because very few people are willing to bring on homeschooling, charters, vouchers, tax credits, ESAs. Thank you. I think my song for you is for others. Have a heart, please, for the one I missed. Thank you for being a member of the Coalition of Conscience. Take care.
Thank you.